and welcome back to another episode of Quick Spin, the Autoweek podcast that gets to the essence of the automobile. Today, we are talking about the 2021 Volkswagen ID.4. That's right, the all-electric Volkswagen crossover. We're talking about that with the great Mr. Wes Raynal. You can check out the Volkswagen ID.4 on our Instagram page right now. That's at Autoweek USA. And while you're there, hey, why don't you head over to our Facebook? Click that like button. That way you get all the great Autoweek content we deliver daily. We're almost ready to talk about this Volkswagen, but first we have to pay the bills. Want to go behind the scenes with the editors of Autoweek, Car and Driver, and Road and Track? Become a member of the Track Club and receive 6 supersized issues of the new Road and Track, plus access to digital content, dozens of partner privileges, exclusive invites to editorial events, and first dibs on insider automotive events, both online and around the world. Hop on in by visiting roadandtrack.com/Autoweek. That's ROADANDTRACK.com/AUTOWEEK. And Mr. Raynal, tell me about this 2021 Volkswagen ID.4.
Basically, what we're looking at is a sort of small to mid-sized crossover, sort of like a Ford Escape size crossover with 77 kilowatt battery pack, 201 horsepower electric motors. The one I had, that motor was only on the rear axle, so I had a rear drive, what's called a first edition ID.4.
This is Volkswagen's, kind of big splash with its EV lineup here in the United States, an EV crossover. Obviously, crossovers are a huge deal, and EVs also now a huge deal.
Right. So in Europe, they have the ID.3, a small sort of Corolla-sized EV. But yes, to your point, this is the first U.S. stint in VW's EV journey. And why not do a crossover, since crossovers are all the rage, right?
I agree.
So I think they sort of at least attempted, God bless them, to do this, to hit the sweet spot between the coming EV wave and the current crossover wave.
Well, Mr. Raynal, I think you spent some time walking us around this little Volkswagen, which we're going to go to right now.
So I'm sitting in a 2021 Volkswagen ID.4. And the ID.4, of course, is Volkswagen's new EV, the first of many coming. It's a smallish crossover. It's about the size of a Ford Escape, so a little smaller than mid-size, but not tiny. I am in the first, what's called the first edition of the ID.4. There's 3 trim levels. The first edition, I think it's the first edition because it has a little first badge on the side of it. So I think that's what it's all about. That one starts at $41,190. It's sort of the middle trim on the ID.4. The interior is, sort of futuristic-ish without being too crazy. It's got a center stack screen where a lot of the functions happen, almost all of them, in fact. And then directly in front of me is a smaller, tiny little screen which has the speed on it and the range. And the range is kind of interesting because it kind of floats around. Like I got in the car this morning and it was 201. And then pulled it out into the street and parked it, and then just got back in it, and it's down to 185. So that's kind of funny. I did not go 20 miles or 15 miles. I took it down to the end of my driveway. But so the range is probably adjustable. You know what I'm saying? It's probably like a suggestion to pay attention to. Anyway, the build quality looks good. The contrasting, it's kind of, in a lot of ways, it's very German because there's a lot of dark surfaces, but then like the steering wheel's white and the little gauge cluster is white. So it's kind of a contrasting interior that I don't know, it's going to take a little bit to get used to it, but I got to tell you, there's a ton of room in here. And like I said, the build quality is pretty good. The seats are comfortable. A lot of it, in a lot of ways, it's very normal. So I guess that's a good thing, right? Isn't that the idea behind these EVs, is to sort of like normalize them? I don't know. We'd have to ask the automaker. Anyway, let's take this thing for a spin. You're not going to hear it because it's an electric car, but trust me, I'm driving it.
Now, Mr. Raynal, it's a lot of good stuff in there. You touched on something that's extremely important, and it's kind of a shifting of a little tide situation with cars, especially electric cars. This just looking at it, just looks like a normal Volkswagen crossover. It looks like it could be another Atlas or Tiguan. It doesn't scream, look, I'm an EV. Obviously, when you notice the grille opening is not that open, you will become aware that it's an EV. But the ID.4 is kind of ushering in this new wave, or a continued wave of like normal-ish cars that also happen to be EVs, opposed to EVs that scream, I am an electric vehicle.
Yeah, so we have like, the Bolt and the Bolt EUV. Those are different than other General Motors products. So they do say something, and it happens to be that they say EV. But then you have the Hyundai Kona EV, and it looks like the Kona. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out as far as, do people want their EVs to look funky and EV-esque, or do they want them to look as normal as possible? So this thing has, other than the flat floor and a little bit more airy interior, it could be any sort of smallish crossover.
Now, going back into the interior, obviously it's very spacey. How easy was it to navigate? What's kind of the user experience? Is it pretty simple, or is it more complicated, like say like a Tesla Model 3, where you've got a big screen that takes care of all of your needs, and that can be challenging?
No, it could be. And I agree with you, and I know what you mean about the Teslas. And this is sort of splits the difference. Like, it's a little bit more traditional. There's like a infotainment screen to your, in the center of the dash, sort of the same size as most of them these days, like 8 inches or 10 inches or so. Many of the functions go through that. The screen in front of you shows you the range and the speed that you're traveling. You can do a lot of the controlling from the wheel, from little knobs and buttons on the wheel. A lot of the functions are on the center stack screen. One thing that I thought was unique about the ID.4 was the way you shift it. So you get, and we can talk about this in the driving portion, but there's a knob. I don't even know if you'd call it a knob, but up on the screen in front of the driver is a knob. Like usually the shift lever is down in the center console or on the steering stalk, right? The steering wheel stalk. This is above that. On the gauges themselves, there's a knob that you twist forward to go forward. You twist backwards to go backwards, and you hit the middle of it to put the car in park. And we'll get into that later, but I thought that was sort of a little bit, and I will say, even after a couple of course, keep in mind I'm old and feeble, but after a couple of days, I was putting it in drive when I wanted to reverse and vice versa.
Well, I can't imagine a better segue to your little drive. We're going to jump to that right now.
Here we go. Here's how you get in the ID.4, and as soon as you step on the brake pedal, it knows that you want to drive it. That's how there's no key, there's no buttons to push, there's nothing. You get in, you shut the door, you put your seatbelt on, you press the brake pedal, and the thing comes to life. So to put the car in gear, there's a knob on the right above the wiper stalk. There's a knob above that. You push it forward, and now I'm in drive. Push it back 1, I'm in neutral. Push it back 2, I'm in reverse. So we're going to be in drive, obviously. This thing has modes, and I'm in the softest mode because that's how I roll. I like the softness. There's eco, comfort, sport, and custom. So I was in eco earlier. Let's try custom. Sorry, comfort. We're in comfort now. So we're rolling off in comfort mode. Press on the gas. Virtually no sound. Not really as peppy as some EVs that you feel, but it's no dog. And I mean, the torque is instantaneous, as they say. Again, kind of like during the walk around, it's a lot of it's quite normal, which I think is a good thing. I think that's what people want in their lives is, to get these EVs to be accepted in, any kind of volume. I mean, besides the fact that we really need to crank up on the infrastructure and the charging stations, I think another challenge is normalness and the quote unquote more normal the car is, I think the better off the automakers making these EVs will be. I think they'll sell more the more normal they are. Having said that, this thing drives, it looks and drives and behaves a lot like a Ford Escape, smooth with a really, really smooth powertrain. The one thing I really noticed the most probably is that when you drive a lot of EVs, they have sort of this heavy feeling, like they feel all the batteries in the floor space, or the batteries are mounted down low, and so they're not necessarily top heavy, but they feel a little bit, I don't know, maybe cumbersome is the word, just a little bit lumbering, even though the batteries are mounted, the weight is mounted low. This car doesn't seem to have that. I don't know how VW did it. And the suspension tuning on this car is, it's done by the Germans, and they know how to make cars ride and handle. So, but what this car doesn't have is sort of that heavyweight feeling. Again, I think that's a good thing. I think it makes it, again, drive like a really, really normal car.
If there's a young person in your life who's really into cars, give them the gift of R&T Crew, the ultimate subscription box by Road & Track for kids ages 6 to 10. Every other month, a box is delivered to their door and is stuffed with cool accessories, fun activities, and a magazine chock full of facts, stories, games, and more. Sign up now and receive the all-new Crushin' It issue and enter the code Autoweek for 10% off an annual box subscription. Just head to rtcrew.com, that's rtcrew.com, and use the code AUTOWEEK. Now, Mr. Raynal, so you do touch on something that is very important when talking about EVs, and that's infrastructure, right? Us here in the great Midwest, or even North Midwest even, in the great state of Michigan, the infrastructure is not great, despite there being a lot of automakers present in this state. Do you think that's going to change anytime soon, or what do you think is going to happen?
So VW is in partnership with a company called Electrify America, which is putting EV charging stations all over the place. They have more than 2,400 fast chargers now around the country, and they're putting them up as fast as they can. But that said, the infrastructure there's not as many charging stations as there are gas stations, obviously, and it's still a major issue. That's sort of, to me, the big disconnect between the automakers who are building EVs and the buying public. The infrastructure is still lacking. There's a lot of focus on building EVs and getting EVs in consumers' hands. I don't see as much focus on the infrastructure and getting the charging stations up. Like, as it stands right now, I could not take a ID.4 to northern Michigan. I mean, I could, but I would have to stop for a half hour and get it charged up. And, that's fine with me. I would do that just for the experience of doing it. But will consumers do it? That's the question.
That is the question, and that's a hard question for automakers and consumers to face. However, on Quick Spin, we hit a different question, right? On Quick Spin, we try to get to the essence of the automobile, and the Volkswagen ID.4 is no exception. So, Mr. Raynal, I posit to you, what is the essence of the Volkswagen ID.4?
Well, it's VW's first shot at the electric car in the United States, right? I would say that the interior is spacious, the ride is comfortable, and it's obviously quiet going down the road. I will also say, however, that it's not exciting to drive like sort of some of these cars that have instantaneous acceleration, instantaneous torque. And I'm still trying to get my head around the styling. I'm still trying to figure out whether anonymous styling is good for an EV or bad for an EV. And I don't know the answer yet. I'm thinking about it.
But I think that about wraps up the Volkswagen ID.4, and I'm looking forward to driving one myself. I'm sure we'll be getting a fleet of them someday. But until then, Mr. Raynal, thank you so much for driving the thing and joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and I'll see you soon.
I know you will. And hey, thank you so much for listening. While you're wrapping the show up, why don't you head over to our Facebook page, click that like button. That way you get all the great Autoweek content we deliver daily. And hey, if you're listening on iTunes, why don't you drop a quick review and give us about 5 stars. Let us know that we're doing a good job. And I know I just said this, but I can't stress this enough. Without your listenership, none of this could be possible. So thank you for listening.